The envelope was thick, elegant cream-colored with embossed gold lettering, the kind that tries to look timeless and expensive. It arrived on a Thursday tucked among grocery coupons and electricity bills. My heart gave a small flutter when I saw the return address, my son's home. I held it for a moment, weighing not just its paper, but the years it had taken for something like this to arrive. His wedding, my son's wedding. I dreamed of that day in so many shapes, from when he was a boy with jelly on his chin to when he left for college with more ambition than warmth. I always thought when the moment came, it would feel like we had made it, that our little family had survived the hard years, the grief, the silences, and the disappointments. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, smoothing the envelope flat with wrinkled fingers before opening it like a sacred relic. Inside was a gold-trimmed card and a folded insert listing the venue, the dress code, and a note about adults only for the reception. I read it again, eyes lingering over the names. His fiancée's name printed larger than his, their future spelled out in serif font. I smiled to myself, thinking how grown up it all was. And then I paused. No mention of my granddaughter. No line saying and guessed. I assumed it was just a formality, a mistake of etiquette, perhaps. Surely he hadn't forgotten. Surely he knew I wouldn't come without her. After all, I raised her when no one else would. When my daughter, his sister, passed, I didn't hesitate. I stepped in not as a duty, but out of love so deep it restructured my bones. That night I called him. The phone rang longer than usual before he picked up. He sounded distracted, as if I'd caught him mid-something. I told him the invitation had arrived, and that it was beautiful. He thanked me not warmly, just politely. I mentioned bringing his niece, my granddaughter, and there was a silence on the other end that lasted just a few seconds too long. "Mom," he said, "careful. We were thinking it might be better if it was just adults. It's a formal event, and it might be a lot for her." I didn't respond right away. I was watching the steam rise from my tea. My chest felt suddenly cold. "She's 15, I said. "She's not a toddler, and she's family." Another pause. Then the line I'd come to resent most in life. "It's not personal, Mom. Just trying to keep things simple." But it is personal, isn't it? When you decide who belongs and who doesn't, when you exclude the child who calls me grandma, with that soft tremor in her voice, like it still hurts not to have her mother. I didn't argue. Not then. I just swallowed the lump in my throat and said I understood. I lied. Because what I really understood deep down was that I had finally stopped being blind to something I'd refused to see for too long. I wasn't part of his life anymore, not really. I was decoration, legacy, a box to tick on the guest list, and my granddaughter. She wasn't even that. After we hung up, I stared at the invitation for a long while. My granddaughter came in from school, tossed her bag on the floor like she always does, and greeted me with a tired smile. I looked at her, her mother's nose, her father's cheekbones, and that soft gentleness she always carried like a shadow. She asked me what I was holding. I told her it was nothing, just some mail. I folded it back into its envelope and slid it into a drawer somewhere beneath expired warranties and forgotten receipts. Later that night, I watched her sleep. I stood by the door of her room listening to her breathing. I had made her promises over the years, quiet ones, that she would always be safe, that she would always be loved, that no matter what the world tried to tell her, she belonged somewhere. I thought about breaking those promises by attending that wedding alone. I thought about what message that would send her, and the ache in my chest returned like an old bruise touched by accident. In the morning, she asked what I was wearing to the wedding. I smiled and said I hadn't decided yet. And I hadn't not, because I was indecisive, but because I already knew. This was no longer just about a dress or a date. This was going to be a test of whether I still had the strength to do what was right, not for appearances, but for love, true love, the kind that doesn't shrink when it's inconvenient. That weekend, I polished the good silver and took out a box of old photographs, ones of my son as a child, ones of my daughter before illness hollowed her out, and ones of my granddaughter, a timeline of laughter, scraped knees, and quiet victories. I laid them out across the table, letting the years whisper their truths back to me. And with each memory, something inside me began to change. Not rage, not sorrow, just a slow, quiet reckoning. They had planned a wedding. I was planning something else. It's strange how long you can carry tension in your body without realizing it, like a knot beneath the shoulder blade you've gotten used to. That's how the years had felt with my son, strained but survivable. We went through the motions of familyhood, holiday calls, birthday cards, the occasional dinner when he remembered. But there was always a current under it all, a subtle growing distance that neither of us dared name. At first I thought it was grief. After all, when my daughter died, it didn't just break me, it scattered the whole family. He coped by pulling away, starting his own life in a city that felt too fast, too polished, too far from the home that raised him. I didn't chase him. I believed in my mother heart that he'd come back when he was ready. But years passed and he never really did. The wedding invitation had simply crystallized. What had been slowly solidifying for years, I was no longer at the center of his world, and perhaps I wasn't meant to be. That was something I could have made peace with. But what twisted the knife was realizing that my granddaughter, my daughter's only child, had become invisible to him. That wasn't distance. That was choice. After the phone call, I tried to act normal. I tried to pretend it was just a misunderstanding, that it didn't bother me, that maybe it really was about guest count or budget or logistics. But the truth kept knocking. I started remembering small things that I had pushed away, like the last Christmas we spent together, when he brought gifts for everyone, but forgot the one thing my granddaughter had asked for, a book she'd mentioned 3 times in their last conversation. Or how he always seemed to look through her, not at her when they were in the same room, and how she'd stopped trying to win his attention a long time ago. I had mistaken her acceptance for resilience. Now I saw it for what it was, resignation. I think part of me wanted to scream, to pick up the phone and demand answers, but the older I get, the less I believe in shouting. Words only matter when they're chosen carefully and delivered with quiet certainty. So instead I watched, I listened. I observed the world he had built for himself, sleek, curated, comfortable. A world with no room for the messiness of love that comes with responsibility. I didn't tell my granddaughter the truth, not then. I didn't have the heart to confirm the suspicion already rooted in her silence. But she's smart, too smart sometimes. She started asking fewer questions about the wedding. She stopped doodling little hearts around the bride's name in her notebook. She withdrew slightly, like a tide pulling back before the storm. That week, my son sent me a follow-up message, a casual one. Hope you're still coming. Let me know if you need hotel suggestions. Hotel. He had assumed I wouldn't stay with him, and maybe he was right. I stared at the screen for a while before replying. Thank you. I'll figure it out. That's all I wrote. Short, measured, enough to keep the mask intact. But inside me, something was stirring. Something that had long been asleep. A part of me that remembered who I used to be before I bent myself into someone more palatable. I used to speak up. I used to protect. I used to believe that love wasn't just something you felt. It was something you proved, especially when it was inconvenient. I started to think back to when I was raising both my children. My son had always been the golden one, charming, bright, full of potential, and my daughter the quieter one, the worrier, the one who asked if I was okay when I thought I was hiding my exhaustion well. Life had never favored her the way it favored him, and after she was gone, I think he started to believe he could rewrite her out of our story entirely. But I couldn't let that happen. Not for me, not for her daughter, not for the years I spent stitching together a home from scraps of broken days. I realized I had been playing along, letting him set the rules, letting him define what counted and what didn't. But I had something he never quite understood: memory. And memory, when paired with conscience, is power. One night I took out an old box from the closet. Inside were letters from my daughter, written during her hospital days and before, when the cancer was only a whisper. In one she wrote, "Promise me she'll never feel forgotten." I remember crying when I read it the first time, pressing my forehead against the page as if I could absorb her through ink and paper. Now I read it again, and it felt like a match struck in a dark room. I had kept that promise every day since her death, but now I was being tested. What do you do when the people you love decide to erase part of your heart from their lives? Do you fight? Do you beg? Do you plead for recognition, for fairness, for decency? Or do you choose something else entirely, something quieter but deeper? That was the question forming in me, slow and certain, and I was starting to understand the answer. By the end of that week, I had unpacked more than just memories. I had unpacked a truth I could no longer ignore. My silence had become complicity, and I couldn't be silent anymore. She wasn't supposed to be mine, not in the way she became. When my daughter died, my granddaughter was just a baby. Soft curls, milk-drunk cheeks, and a silence to her that felt older than her months. I remember the day I took her home from the hospital, the weight of her car seat in one hand and my daughter's necklace clutched in the other. No one else stepped forward. Not her father, not his family. Just me. I didn't think twice. I wasn't thinking at all. I was surviving. But something happened as the days turned into nights, and those nights into years. I fell in love again. A deeper, quieter kind of love. One shaped by loss, stitched with purpose, and sealed with every bedtime story, every fevered night, every whispered, "I miss her," that came from a voice too small to carry grief, but trying anyway. She became my reason, my sunrise and my lullaby, and not once, not for a moment, did I see her as a burden. Even when my back ached from bending over to tie her shoes, even when money was tight and the groceries had to be stretched, even when I felt so alone, I would cry in the laundry room just to keep her from seeing. Because when she laughed, the world softened. When she hugged me with those little arms, I believed I was doing something right in a world that had taken too much. And she never asked for more than love, never once complained that she didn't have the newest phone, or that our dinners were simple, or that I worked extra shifts at the library just to keep things afloat. She was the kind of child that looked you in the eye when she thanked you, the kind that left notes in my apron pockets. "Thank you for my pancakes," or "You're the best grandma in the world." I saved every one of them in a small tin box by my bed. On bad days, I'd open that box, unfold those crooked little papers, and breathe. She never called me Mom. I didn't want her to. I wanted her to hold on to her mother's memory, to know that love could survive, even after someone leaves the room forever. But she called me Mama G. I don't know where it came from. Just one day she said it, and it stuck. That name held everything. I was grandmother, mother, guardian, witness. It became my favorite name in the world. So when the wedding invitation arrived and the conversation with my son happened and the truth began to reveal itself, all I could think about was her, how I would explain this to her, how I would shield her from the sting of exclusion without lying, how I would teach her that love should not require begging. She had been left out, and it wasn't just a wedding, it was a declaration, a message that she didn't count, that she was not part of the story her uncle wanted to tell to the world, and it cut me open in ways I thought I'd long healed. I remember sitting on the edge of her bed that evening, brushing her hair with the slow rhythm she always liked. She asked me if I thought her dress was still okay for the wedding. I told her she looked beautiful because she did, but my voice caught in my throat, and I had to turn away for a moment. She didn't push. She never did. She'd learned somehow that grown-ups carry storms inside them, and sometimes all you can do is wait for the rain to pass. I wanted so badly to protect her from this, but I also knew that pretending wouldn't protect her. It would only teach her to silence herself, to make herself small to fit into spaces never meant to hold her. I'd seen what that kind of shrinking does to women. I'd seen it in my daughter's eyes, when she was told to smile more, to need less, to stay quiet. I wasn't going to let that happen again. So I told her the truth. Gently, carefully. I said, "Sweetheart, there's been a change of plans. The wedding won't be something we go to together." She looked up at me confused. Why not? I thought we were invited. And that's when I saw it, just a flicker. But it was there. That first taste of rejection. That first question that lives in your chest long after it's been answered. Am I not enough? I held her hand. You are always invited where love is. But sometimes people don't know how to see what matters. That's not your fault, and it's not mine. But we get to decide how we respond, and we're going to do it with dignity, not shame. She didn't cry. She just nodded, lips pressed tight. Then she leaned into me and whispered, "I'm glad I have you." And that moment, it anchored me. All the anger, all the grief, all the humiliation they washed away under the weight of her trust. Because that's what it really comes down to in life, doesn't it? Not the grand gestures or the expensive parties, but the people who show up when you're bruised and unsure and small. The ones who look at you and say, "You matter. You always matter." She was my granddaughter, my daughter's daughter, my second chance at a love that builds rather than breaks. And if the world didn't have a seat for her at its table, I would build her a new one carved from legacy, polished with memory, and strong enough to carry her wherever she chose to go. Looking back, the warning signs had been there for years, small slights, quiet corrections, withheld warmth. But it was that phone call, the moment he hesitated before saying she couldn't come, that became the first clear bell of betrayal ringing in my ears. It wasn't just a decision. It was a declaration of who was considered family and who was tolerated. He had said it gently, as if sparing me some greater pain. "It's not personal, Mom," he had told me, but that's what people say when they've made a decision that hurts you and want to pretend they haven't. I remember standing at the kitchen window after we hung up the phone, still warm in my hand, watching the dogwood branches sway in the breeze. The flowers were just beginning to fall, tiny pale petals drifting down to the grass like discarded promises. I felt like one of them, fragile, easy to sweep aside. He had always been good at dressing cruelty in calmness. He never raised his voice, never lashed out. No, his version of harm was cleaner, sharper, veiled in practicality. That's how it had always been. When he stopped coming home for Thanksgiving, it was because work got busy. When he didn't visit during my daughter's last months, it was because the hospital made him uncomfortable. When he forgot birthdays, it was because the calendar app had failed. There was always a reason, never an apology. But this was different. This wasn't forgetting. This was deliberate. This was erasure. The next day I called him again, thinking maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe he hadn't meant what he said. Maybe it was nerves or stress or something else that made him speak that way. I still wanted to believe the best. That's the thing about mothers, we're stubborn with our hope. We believe in our children long after we should stop. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice light. I was just wondering if there was any wiggle room. She's really excited. She already picked out a dress. He sighed on the other end, not loudly but audibly, as if my love was a burden. "Mom, I talked to Emily about it. We're really trying to keep the event classy, limited guest list, no kids running around." "She's 15, I reminded him again, more firmly this time. "I know, but still, you understand, right? We just want the day to be about us, simple, clean." Clean. The word stuck with me, as if love was something you had to disinfect, as if my granddaughter's presence would dirty the aesthetic. I didn't respond. I couldn't, not without letting something sharp slip out that I'd regret. So I told him I had to go, that dinner was on the stove. Another lie. But lies I was starting to see were becoming the language we all used to keep from breaking the illusion. That evening I went for a walk. I needed airspace silence. I walked the same loop I had taken with my daughter when she was young, and later with her daughter in a stroller. The sidewalks remembered our footsteps. I swear they did. The cracked pavement beneath my feet felt like an old friend, worn and familiar. I passed the rose bushes in Mrs. Dewey's yard, the ones my granddaughter always stopped to smell, and I let myself cry a little. I thought about how much love I had poured into my family, the endless cups of tea, the knitted sweaters, the late-night phone calls when someone needed comforting, the holidays I hosted even when I was too tired to stand. None of it perfect, but all of it sincere. And yet here I was, standing outside of a decision I had no say in, watching my legacy get edited in real time. Later, I sat on my porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee, watching the sun lower itself gently behind the trees. The sky turned that soft orange that always makes the world look like it's been brushed with forgiveness, but I couldn't feel it, not yet. I looked at my granddaughter through the screen door. She was on the couch with her headphones on, sketching something in her notebook. Her face was serene, but her shoulders had a little more tension than usual. She knew. Maybe not all of it, but enough. I had told her the official reason, that they wanted to keep the guest list small, but she could read the space between words. She was her mother's child after all. I sat with my coffee and the ache in my chest and realized something that hadn't fully formed until that moment. It wasn't that she was being left out of a party. It was that she was being written out of a future. That wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a declaration of who mattered, who belonged, who counted. And according to my son, my granddaughter did not. I stayed on that porch long after the stars came out. The air grew cooler, and I wrapped myself in a shawl, the same shawl my daughter used to borrow when she got cold. Memory wrapped itself around me like fabric, familiar, comforting, but impossible to ignore. I thought about the promises I had made, to my daughter, to myself, to that baby I took home from the hospital, trembling and wide-eyed and silent. I promised she would never feel unloved, never feel forgotten. The first warning sign had been delivered, quiet, polished, and sharp. But now I had seen it, and once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. There's a particular kind of pain in realizing something wasn't an accident, it was deliberate, that it wasn't an oversight or misunderstanding, but a choice, made knowingly, calmly, and with full understanding of who would be hurt. That's what finally settled in my chest like a stone the day I saw the seating chart. It was about a week before the wedding. I had called to ask if they needed help with anything: decorations, favors, errands, and my son sent over a PDF titled Final Layout and Table Assignments. I opened it eagerly, hoping to feel included. I should have known better. My name was there. Table 3, tucked between his father's second cousins and someone labeled Emily's aunt, maybe. But nowhere was there a space for my granddaughter. I scrolled and searched and reread the list like a detective looking for a clue that would change the ending of a mystery. But the truth was clear. She wasn't just forgotten. She had been edited out. I sat at my desk staring at the screen, my hand frozen on the mouse. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt hollow, as if all the years of caregiving, all the birthdays I'd organized, all the sacrifices I'd quietly made, had been erased with a keystroke. She had loved him once, her uncle. When she was little, she'd drawn pictures of them together. She used to beg me to take her to visit. But as time went on, and his visits grew shorter and less frequent, she stopped asking. And now, there was this, a formal confirmation of what she must have already felt deep in her bones. I didn't tell her, not right away. I wasn't ready to see that look on her face, the one I'd seen the day her mother died, the one that asked without words, "Why is the world like this?" So I folded the paper in half and tucked it under a pile of unopened mail, like maybe if I buried it, I could protect her for one more day. That evening, my son called, cheerful, brisk, full of pre-wedding adrenaline. He wanted to make sure I got the seating chart and confirm my meal preference. I could hear the bride in the background laughing. The sound made my skin prickle. Not because I disliked her. I didn't know her well enough to dislike her, but because it reminded me how far away I was from their joy, how I was allowed to orbit their celebration but never touch its center. I asked him again calmly about my granddaughter. There's still no space for her. He sighed again, always with the sighs, as if my love was too heavy to carry. "Mom, we went over this. It's adults only. Emily's side has a lot of extended family, and we had to cut somewhere. Cut somewhere, like a weed, like a mistake. But she's not just anyone," I said, voice trembling despite myself. "She's family." There was a pause, then the familiar patronizing tone I had come to hate. "You're blowing this out of proportion. She'll be fine. It's one night." But that's the thing, they always think it's just one night, one party, one absence. They never see the accumulation, the way these little dismissals build on top of each other until a child starts to believe they're not wanted, until they stop showing up, until they stop hoping. "She'll be with a neighbor," I lied. "That's what you want, right?" My voice came out brittle but sharp. He didn't answer, just mumbled something about timelines and how he had to go, and then the line went dead. That night I sat with my granddaughter on the couch. We were watching an old movie, one she'd seen a dozen times, the kind where love conquers all and families come together in candlelight and forgiveness. I watched her more than I watched the screen. Her profile in the dim light, her half smile, her quiet, eager heart. She had no idea, not yet. And I thought, if they can't make room for her at a table, they will not make room for her in their lives. This isn't just about dinner or dancing. This is about legacy, about who gets written into the story and who is left on the margins. So I made a quiet decision. I would go. I would attend this performance they called a wedding. But I would carry more than a purse and a smile. I would carry the truth. And I would watch, closely, quietly. I would give them the dignity of their day, but I would not forget. I would not forgive the easy way. And my granddaughter, I would hold her twice as close, I would make her pancakes the morning of the wedding. I would brush her hair and tell her stories about her mother. I would make her feel like the center of a universe that knew how to love properly. And then I would go to the wedding alone. But I would not bring a gift. The rehearsal dinner was held in a charming old inn on the edge of town, the kind of place with creaky floors, dim chandeliers, and waiters who smile with their teeth, but not their eyes. I had been invited, of course, and like always I told myself to show up with grace, to be quiet, to smile, to act as though I still believed in all of it, in family, in celebration, in pretending that nothing had gone wrong. But this time I wasn't alone. I brought my granddaughter. I wasn't trying to cause a scene. I just wanted her to be seen. She wore a soft blue dress, one she picked out herself with her saved-up birthday money. She'd asked me 3 times if she looked okay before we left the house. I told her she looked beautiful, and she did. She was all limbs and promise, with her mother's soft eyes and a quiet dignity that most adults never grow into. We walked into that inn, like anyone would, hopeful, expectant, a little nervous. I'd called ahead to ask if we could attend. They said yes. But what I didn't know, what no one told me, was that yes didn't mean welcome. The first thing I noticed was the look on the bride's face. It wasn't anger, not exactly, more like surprise that curdled into discomfort. My son came over quickly, hugged me, gave her a quick nod. "You brought her," he said, voice low. Not a question, not a greeting, just a statement layered with quiet disapproval. "You said it was fine," I whispered. I called ahead. He looked over his shoulder at the seating arrangement at the tables already set. "We didn't plan for this," he said. "There's no place for her to sit. No place for her to sit." How many times does a child have to hear that in actions, if not words, before they stop asking for a seat at the table? I didn't want to make a scene. That's never been my way, so I asked if we could just sit in the back. He hesitated, said something about checking with Emily. He returned 5 minutes later and pointed us toward a table near the kitchen, a side table, with 2 chairs pulled hastily from storage. We sat there, my granddaughter and I, next to a swinging door and the clatter of dishes. The server didn't even bring us menus until I waved him down. And while the others toasted and laughed and took group photos, we sat in that dim corner like ghosts at a party we once belonged to. My granddaughter didn't say much. She just picked at her salad eyes drifting across the room. Once she looked at me and smiled small and soft. I could tell she was trying not to show how much it hurt. Later, when the speeches began, they dimmed the lights and passed out glasses of champagne. The bride's father made a long, rambling toast about family and tradition and roots. I felt my throat tighten. My granddaughter reached for her water glass, her hands steady, her face unreadable. Then my son stood up, beaming with pride, and spoke about gratitude and love and the people who've shaped us. His eyes swept the room. They passed over me like wind over glass. No mention of his sister, no mention of me, no mention of the girl sitting beside me who had done nothing wrong but exist. When the applause ended, I excused us early. I told my son I wasn't feeling well, and he nodded with relief. No protest, no concern, just relief that the uncomfortable wrinkle in his perfect picture would quietly fold itself away. We walked out into the cool night. I held my granddaughter's hand. Her fingers were cold, even though mine were warm. As we got to the car, she said softly, "They didn't want me there, did they?" I stopped. I looked at her. I wanted to tell her something poetic, something protective, that they were just stressed, that it wasn't about her, that adults get things wrong, but I couldn't lie to her again. "No," I said, kneeling down so I could look her in the eye. "They didn't. And it's not your fault. It's not because of who you are. It's because of who they've chosen to be." She nodded once. No tears, just a quiet processing like a child forced to grow up another inch too soon. On the ride home, she didn't say much. She leaned her head against the window and watched the world blur by. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror and saw her blinking fast, her face set still as stone. That night after I put her to bed, I sat in the dark kitchen and held my daughter's old mug in my hands, the one with the chipped handle and the faded paint. I thought about how she would have reacted to this. My daughter was the gentle one, yes, but she had a fire in her when it came to fairness. She wouldn't have let this stand. I could feel her with me in that moment. Not angry, just steady, just sure. And that's when I made the decision. Final, firm, quiet. I would go to the wedding. I would smile for their pictures. I would clap at their vows. But I would not forget, and I would not forgive. Not this, not the exclusion of a child who had done nothing but love and trust and hope. Some moments cut so deeply, they become turning points. That night in a restaurant corner next to a kitchen door, my granddaughter was told without words that she didn't belong. And in that same moment, I knew I would make sure she knew the opposite for the rest of her life. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself again and again that the bride didn't know us well, that she was young, that weddings make people say careless things. But there are words that lodge themselves under your skin even when spoken in passing, even when paired with a brittle smile. And hers did just that. It happened near the end of the rehearsal dinner. I was standing by the coat rack waiting for the valet to bring my car around. My granddaughter had already stepped outside, wrapped in my shawl, standing under the porch light like a painting of patience. That's when the bride walked over. Her heels tapped softly across the floor. She was holding a flute of champagne, the bubbles rising too fast, the glass tilted just slightly. She smiled. That sharp, bright kind of smile that women are taught to wear like armor. And then she leaned in, touching my arm gently, and said it softly, sweetly, like a secret. I really admire how you've handled things, Mrs. Jenkins. Raising someone else's child can't be easy, especially with all that history. All that history. I didn't flinch, but I felt the room tilt. I looked her in the eye and saw it, that small gleam of pity wrapped in superiority. She didn't see my granddaughter as family. She saw her as baggage, as something inherited, like a debt no one wanted, but had to acknowledge in polite company. I forced a smile. She's not someone else's child, I said evenly. She's my granddaughter, my daughter's child. She's mine. But the bride had already looked away, waving at a bridesmaid across the room, as if my words were nothing more than decorative punctuation in a conversation she was already finished with. I stood there for a moment longer, watching her walk away. Her dress shimmered under the warm light. Her future was unfolding just as she'd planned, perfectly curated, thoroughly sanitized, and built on the quiet dismissal of those who didn't fit the aesthetic. She had chosen a life of clean edges and smooth surfaces. My granddaughter and I, we carried too much texture, too many rough truths. We didn't belong in her version of the fairy tale. I left the inn with my granddaughter in silence. The drive home was short, but it stretched inside me. My hands were tight on the wheel. My jaw ached from clenching it too long. She didn't ask me what the bride had said, but she must have felt the shift in the air, the way I turned up the heater just slightly, the way I put on her favorite music even though it made my head ache. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I walked into my daughter's old room. I don't go in there often, not because it hurts too much, but because I try to honor the stillness of it. But tonight I needed her. I sat on the edge of the bed, folded my hands in my lap, and let my mind wander. I imagined what she would have said. how her laugh could cut through cruelty, how fiercely she would have protected her daughter from condescension dressed as kindness. I whispered aloud, "They don't see her. Not really." And in the silence that followed, I heard my own voice echo back with clarity, "Then make them." Because love isn't passive. It doesn't sit quietly at the children's table while the rest of the family feasts. It doesn't accept crumbs. It demands presence, recognition, space, and if none is given, it builds its own. I lay awake for hours. The house was so quiet. Even the wind outside seemed hesitant to speak. I watched the ceiling and let the words of the bride circle in my head until they lost their meaning. But the emotion stayed, that sticky, burning shame of being spoken down to, of being thanked for surviving something you never chose. It wasn't about me, though, not really. It was about what that whisper revealed, how they viewed my granddaughter, not as a blessing, not even as neutral, but as a blemish, a shadow they hoped wouldn't show up in the wedding photos. And once you hear that, once you truly hear it, you can never unhear it. The next morning, I made pancakes for my granddaughter. She was quiet but smiling, and I knew she was trying to make things easy for me, to be less, to take up less space. And that broke me. I knelt beside her at the table, took her hand and said, "You never, ever have to make yourself smaller for anyone. Do you understand me?" Her eyes widened, confused. I had never spoken so firmly, so suddenly. You are enough, just as you are. And if someone can't see that, it's not your job to convince them. It's their loss, not yours. She nodded slowly. I kissed her forehead. I could smell the faint scent of her shampoo, the one with the chamomile she loved. She was still just a girl. But she was growing fast right in front of me, shaped by every word spoken around her, and I refused to let their words be the ones that defined her. The bride's whisper had done more than offend me. It had awakened something, a deep-rooted need to reclaim what mattered, to draw a circle around my granddaughter, with every ounce of strength I had left, not to shield her from the world, but to show her that she was worth the fight. The morning of the wedding was unnaturally quiet, a kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from something holding its breath. I made breakfast like always, eggs, toast a few slices of melon, but it sat untouched. My granddaughter came into the kitchen wearing her soft green robe, the one with little embroidered stars on the sleeve. She was trying to look like she didn't mind, but she did. I could see it in the way she avoided looking at the table, in the way her fingers picked at the hem of her sleeve like it was something that needed unraveling. I told her I'd only be gone for the afternoon, that she could spend the day drawing, reading, watching her favorite shows. I said it with warmth, but inside I was breaking, because I knew she wouldn't enjoy any of those things today. Not well knowing that the people she once called family had drawn a circle and left her outside of it. I had once told her that family meant unconditional love, but here we were dissecting that definition in real time. Before I left, she handed me something, a tiny folded note with a flower drawn on the back, for after she whispered, I kissed her head too hard, too long, and walked out the door like a traitor dressed in Sunday best. The venue was everything they had wanted, grand, expensive, tailored. It was held at a glass-walled garden that overlooked a lake, white chairs in perfect rows, musicians in black, floral arrangements that smelled like money. Everyone looked polished, like they'd stepped out of a catalog, every smile rehearsed. I moved through the crowd like a ghost in pearls. When my son saw me, he hugged me quickly, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Thanks for being here, Mom." His eyes were already scanning the room for someone more important. I wanted to ask him if he thought I'd come just to witness what love looks like when it wears blinders, but I bit my tongue. I had already decided I would not make a scene. I would not cry. I would sit through the vows, the toasts, the dancing, and I would remember every detail, every choice they made as clearly as I remembered the day my daughter died. The ceremony began. The music swelled. The bride floated down the aisle in silk and lace. People sniffled and sighed. Vows were exchanged, vows about love, honor, and always making space for each other. And I sat there wondering how much of that would last, built as it was on the foundation of exclusion. Because when you begin your union by turning your back on family, what kind of door are you really closing? But it was at the reception that I truly broke. The dinner was held in a massive hall with cascading lights and glittering cutlery. I took my place at table 3, my name written in gold script as if beauty could soften the insult. Across from me sat 2 strangers, second cousins of the bride, I later learned. One asked politely, "Do you have any grandchildren?" I smiled too tightly and said, "Yes, one. She's not here." They nodded, murmured something about such a shame, and turned back to their wine. Then came the slideshow. Photos of the bride and groom as children, photos of family holidays, my son as a toddler, a teenager, a college graduate. And then a picture of him holding my daughter when she was a baby. My breath caught. I reached out slightly instinctively. There she was, briefly, and then gone. The screen moved on. No pictures of her as an adult. No pictures of my granddaughter. No images of the last 20 years of our lives. Our losses. Our love. We had been edited out of the timeline. I sat very still, a smile still frozen on my lips, my hands folded in my lap like a child in church. Later, during the first dance, people clapped and cheered as the couple spun across the floor. My son was beaming. He looked so happy. And I realized with a thud, this was the life he wanted. One where the complicated parts of his past were tucked neatly away, where grief and responsibility didn't cast shadows, where the child his sister left behind could be erased, and no one would even notice. I excused myself. I walked through the hall past groups of laughing guests down a narrow hallway toward the coat check. I stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, clutching my purse like it contained something precious. And then I opened it. Inside was a card I had written, a check, a handwritten note of congratulations, a small envelope of vintage earrings passed down from my grandmother, all meant for the bride and groom. I had sealed it weeks ago, before everything fully unraveled. I had meant it as a gesture of peace, of goodwill. I looked at it for a long moment, and then quietly I took it out and slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat. I didn't throw it away. I didn't tear it up. I simply decided it would not be given. Because some gifts should only be offered to those who see you. I left without saying goodbye. No fuss, no explanation. I walked out into the cool evening, got in my car, and drove home. When I opened the front door, my granddaughter looked up from the couch. Her eyes met mine, searching. I nodded slowly. She smiled. Just once. Later that night, when I unfolded the note she'd given me, it read, "Thank you for trying. I love you more than they ever could." And that was the only gift I needed. I had never done something like that before. Walk into a family event dressed for celebration and leave behind nothing but silence. It wasn't bitterness that guided me that day, it was clarity. I had carried the envelope in my purse, the one with the check and the heirloom earrings, and the neatly written card that said, "May you build a home filled with love and grace." But I never placed it on the table. Not out of revenge, not even out of anger. I simply realized, standing beneath those crystal chandeliers and gold-edged place settings, that my gift was no longer appropriate, because that message wasn't true anymore. That home wouldn't be built with love, not the kind that includes, not the kind that holds space for history, for loss, for sacrifice, not the kind that knows how to say, "We see you, we remember you, you belong." The gift table itself was beautiful, dressed in ivory linen wrapped in soft light, stacked with wrapped boxes and calligraphy-labeled cards. A little sign even read, "Thank you for being part of our story." I stood near it for a moment, hands clutching my purse, heart pulsing in a strange, cold rhythm. I thought of placing the envelope there anyway, just to avoid questions. But what message would that send? That love is something you keep offering even when it's not welcomed. That money and heirlooms can soften exclusion. That dignity should be bartered for tradition. No, I couldn't. So I walked past the table and kept walking, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. No one noticed. That's the part that will always stay with me. No one looked. No one stopped me. My son didn't turn. The bride didn't call out. I was invisible in a room full of faces I once believed were family. And there in that invisibility, I found a strange, still kind of power. I drove home slower than usual. The roads were empty. The streetlights looked tired. And somewhere between the venue and my front porch, I realized that a line had been drawn not just by them, but now by me too. It wasn't a line of hostility. It wasn't even a punishment. It was a boundary, quiet, unshakable, and long overdue. When I stepped into the house, the lights were off, but my granddaughter was awake. I found her sitting on the rug in the living room, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, sketchbook open in her lap. She didn't ask how it went. She didn't have to. She looked up, eyes steady, and I saw it. The question she didn't want to ask: did they miss me? I sat beside her gently, took the pencil from her hand and said I didn't leave the gift. She looked at me confused. I explained, slowly, carefully, not in anger, but with the same tone I used when helping her understand something painful but necessary. "I want you to understand something," I said. "When people show you who they are, you don't need to argue with them. You just need to choose who you'll be in response." She was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, "Did they even notice?" And that right there was the question, the one that burned hottest. I answered honestly, "No, not yet, but they will." Later that night, I sat alone in my room holding the envelope. I opened it, unfolded the card, and stared at the message I had written weeks earlier, when I still believed this wedding would be a moment of healing. The check was still there, unsigned. The earrings sat in tissue paper, glinting softly in the lamplight. I thought about how many things we give in this life out of obligation, out of duty, out of fear, and how rarely we give from a place of self-respect. I placed the card in the fireplace, watched it curl and blacken into ash, not with vengeance, but with release. The earrings I put in a small velvet box, the same one my mother had used when she gave them to me. I slipped them into the drawer beside my bed. One day, when the time was right, I would give them to my granddaughter. And I wouldn't wait for a wedding. I wouldn't wait for someone else's approval. I would give them just because she is mine, and she is worthy, and she is enough. Over the following days, texts trickled in, from guests, from distant relatives. "You looked so elegant, so glad you could make it. Can't believe it's over already." Not a single message asking how I felt, or why I left so early, or where my gift had gone. And from my son, nothing. No call, no message, no acknowledgement. He had received what he wanted, a wedding unmarred by complication, a celebration curated to exclude. But I had gained something too, a kind of calm, a deep, unshakable knowing that I had chosen right, that I hadn't performed love. I had protected it. And in the end, I knew sometimes the most powerful gift you can give is none at all. There's a silence that follows betrayal, not the sharp, noisy kind that comes with slammed doors and shouted words, but the soft, weighty kind, like a fog that settles over your skin and refuses to lift. That's what filled the house in the days after the wedding. No dramatic confrontations, no angry phone calls, just stillness, a waiting, as if the whole world had paused to ask, "What now?" I moved through those days like a woman relearning how to breathe. I made tea every morning. I swept the porch. I folded laundry with steady hands. But my thoughts never stayed in the moment. They kept circling that glass-walled garden, that polished table, that empty space where my granddaughter should have sat. My phone buzzed occasionally. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, surface-level greetings, phrases like, "Wasn't it a beautiful ceremony?" and "So good to see you, all sugar, no substance." I responded politely but briefly. I had no desire to explain the decision I had made. Dignity doesn't announce itself. 3 days passed before I heard from my son. A single text. "Thanks again for coming. Hope you're resting. Let's talk soon." I stared at it. No mention of my early departure. No question about the missing gift. No inquiry about the child I didn't bring. Just that gentle, passive glossing over he'd mastered. He didn't want a conversation. He wanted closure. Neat, quiet, final. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a long walk. The trees were beginning to change their edges, tinged with amber and rust. I thought about how autumn never apologizes for letting go. It simply sheds what no longer serves. And perhaps that's what I was doing too, not in anger, but in truth. When I returned home, I found my granddaughter reading on the couch legs tucked beneath her, a cup of cocoa on the table beside her. She looked up and smiled, just like always. But something had shifted in her too. She carried herself differently now, as if she had seen something she couldn't unsee, as if she understood with sudden clarity how love can sometimes walk away in silence and never return. We didn't talk much that evening. We sat together, watched an old black and white film, and let the world outside fade away. At one point, I reached over and held her hand. She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something that shattered and soothed me all at once. Trust, still there, still intact, because she had seen me choose her, and that I knew would be the memory she kept. That night, I pulled out the box from the closet, the one where I kept important documents, deeds, bank statements, my will. I opened it slowly, the papers whispering as they unfolded. I hadn't looked at these in years. Everything in it had been left to my son. The house, the savings, the keepsakes passed down from my mother and hers before her. I had thought for a long time that this was simply the natural order of things. But what is natural about legacy when it ignores love? I stared at the name, scrawled across the page, his name, and felt no hate, only clarity. Love does not mean allowing yourself to be forgotten, to be stepped over. Love can draw lines too, and sometimes it must. So I began to write. I rewrote everything. Not out of vengeance, but justice. Not out of rage, but remembrance. I wrote my granddaughter's name across the top of the page, slowly, carefully. With all the weight of the years I had carried her through the nights, I stayed up rocking her through grief. The mornings I packed her lunch with a note tucked inside. I listed the house, the savings, the jewelry, the family recipes, the photo albums, the garden tools, all of it, every piece of who I had been, and what I had built. It was no longer his inheritance, it was hers. Not because she asked, but because she loved without asking. The next day I called my lawyer. We met in his quiet office lined with books and quiet clocks. I told him what I wanted. He didn't ask why. He just nodded, took notes, and said, "I'll make it official." On the way home, I felt lighter, like something I'd carried too long had finally slipped off my shoulders. I thought about how many women like me go their whole lives, hoping to be seen, hoping their worth will eventually be acknowledged, and how many never are. I had loved my son with everything I had, but love that isn't returned with respect eventually turns to something else, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't scream, it just closes the door. Later that week, my son called. I let it ring. He left a voicemail, cheerful and oblivious, just checking in. "Haven't heard from you. Let me know when we can grab lunch." I saved it. Not because I intended to respond, but because I wanted to remember what indifference sounds like. The aftermath had begun, and in that aftermath I was rebuilding not a house or a future for someone else, but a sanctuary for the two of us. Me and my granddaughter. Two women left out of a story who decided to write their own ending. And I promised myself there would be no more shrinking, no more apologizing, no more folding love into corners where it didn't fit. It was a strange thing walking into that lawyer's office with a purse full of names and memories, ready to rewrite the bones of my life. The space itself hadn't changed in years. Same scuffed oak desk, same ticking wall clock that always ran 5 minutes fast, same chair that creaked slightly when I sat down. But I wasn't the same woman who had sat there decades earlier, drafting the original version of my will. Then I was a mother of 2 widowed, 2 young, holding on to the idea that family would carry forward what I could not, that they would honor the love I'd given them by taking care of what I'd built. I had been wrong. Mr. Peterson, my lawyer of nearly 30 years, looked at me over his glasses with his usual professional calm. "What's changed?" he asked gently. I took a deep breath, unfolding the old will with careful fingers, everything that matters. He nodded, said nothing more, and handed me a fresh form. His silence was a kindness, and I was grateful for it. I wrote my granddaughter's name first, slow, deliberate strokes. The ink bled just a little through the page, like it too understood the weight of what I was doing. I wrote that the house, the creaky one with the lilac bushes she and I planted with the kitchen, still smelling faintly of cinnamon, and Sunday mornings would be hers. I wrote that the savings account, the one I had built grain by grain from modest jobs and skipped indulgences, would be hers too. I included the antique jewelry, the photo albums, the quilts passed down from my mother and hers before her. I even listed the old piano she liked to tinker with, though it hadn't been in tune in years. Then came the note to attach, not legally necessary but essential to me. I leave these things not as reward but recognition, for every day she sat quietly beside me when the world turned its back, for every kindness she gave without being asked, for the way she held her sorrow like a flower, soft and precious and alive, and for never asking to be chosen, yet never leaving my side. When I finished, Mr. Peterson read it over, adjusted his glasses, and murmured, "She's lucky to have you." I shook my head. No, I'm lucky to have her. We signed the documents. He notarized them. I folded my copy carefully as though folding a sacred cloth and slipped it into my purse. Walking home afterward, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just alignment, a long overdue setting of the bone. It was not an act of revenge. It was an act of restoration. My legacy, long misaligned by habit and guilt, was now in the hands of the one person who had earned it, not by birthright, but by love. That evening I made dinner roast chicken, her favorite. My granddaughter set the table, humming softly. When we sat down to eat, I looked at her, really looked. Her eyes were her mother's eyes, her smile a mix of wonder and worry, just like my own had been once. She asked me what I had done today. I tied up some things I said simply, things that needed to be set right. She nodded. No further questions. She never pried, not out of indifference, but out of respect. She gave space the way only those who have known loss do. Later that night, I sat in my room with the new will beside me and stared out the window at the stars. I thought of all the women who had come before me, my mother, her mother, who gave their lives to people who never looked back, who passed down not just china sets and brooches, but unspoken lessons about endurance and sacrifice. I thought about how many of them never got to say, "This is mine to give, and I choose whom I give it to." But I did, and in doing so I had broken something open, not a bond, but a cycle. In the days that followed, my son called twice, left messages both casual. He hadn't yet realized. The silence was still just silence to him, not consequence. But the time would come. The papers had been filed. The future had shifted. And maybe he would one day come questioning why I made the choices I did. And when he did, I would answer with calm, unshaking truth. Because love is not a transaction. Because being my child gave you my devotion. But what you did with it, how you dismissed her, how you dismissed me, that was your choice. And this was mine. I hadn't just changed my will, I had reclaimed my voice. It didn't take long. The silence that had once seemed so convenient for them began to shift, turning from comfort into suspicion. Maybe it was when the thank you card started to return unopened, or when mutual acquaintances mentioned that I had left the wedding early without saying goodbye. Maybe it was just a hunch. But eventually my son reached out, not with a casual text or a photo from the honeymoon, but with a long, carefully worded message that began with, "I've been thinking a lot lately." It was the kind of message people send when they sense they've gone too far, but aren't ready to say so outright. He asked how I was, said he missed our conversations. He added that he hoped everything had gone okay at the wedding, that he noticed I seemed distracted. He said, "I know things haven't been perfect, but I'd really like us to talk. Maybe clear the air." I didn't respond right away. I read the message twice, maybe 3 times, letting each sentence settle into place like mismatched puzzle pieces. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was an invitation to pretend things hadn't happened the way they did, to reset the clock without acknowledging the hour it stopped. A few days later, he called. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was careful, gentle, like someone trying to approach a frightened animal without making it run. He said he'd love to have dinner, just the 2 of us, to talk things through, that he understood if I was upset, that he never meant to hurt me. And then, in a quieter voice, "Emily feels terrible too. Maybe she said something wrong at the rehearsal, we're not sure, but please don't take it the wrong way. Please don't take it the wrong way." As if exclusion were something soft, as if seating someone beside a kitchen door were a misunderstanding, as if editing a child from a celebration were a glitch in the system. I sat in the living room after the call ended, the late afternoon light, casting long shadows across the rug. My granddaughter was outside reading beneath the tree swing I had hung for her when she was 7. I could see her through the window legs, crossed sunlight, dappling her notebook, one hand absently twirling a strand of hair. She looked so peaceful. And that's when I realized nothing in me wanted to go back, not even for closure. Still, part of me needed to hear it from them, needed to see, maybe for the last time, whether the people I once called family could finally tell the truth. So I agreed to dinner. We met at a restaurant near the edge of town. Not fancy, but not familiar, either neutral ground. When I arrived, they were already seated, smiling too brightly, both dressed as if they were playing the role of the remorseful children in some well-rehearsed play. My son stood to hug me. Emily offered a kiss on the cheek. I accepted both without warmth, without anger. We ordered, chit-chatted. They told me about the honeymoon, the weather in Maui, the spa treatments, the view from their suite. I listened, nodding, sipping my water, waiting. It took until the dessert menu arrived for the real conversation to begin. We wanted to say something my son said carefully, about the wedding. I placed my fork down and met his eyes. Go on. He took a breath. We're sorry. If you felt like you weren't welcome, or if she felt that way. That was never our intention. If I repeated, that's a small word given the size of what happened. He winced. Emily looked down at her hands. She's not just a niece, I continued. She's your sister's child. She's family. And you knew what it would mean when you chose to exclude her. I didn't mean he began. But you did. Maybe not to hurt, but to ignore. And that sometimes is worse. Emily spoke next quietly. It was just a lot to plan. So many people. We didn't want drama. And instead I said gently, you created a different kind. One that doesn't fade after a few drinks and a dance. One that echoes. There was silence then. A heavy, loaded kind. My son reached across the table, touched my hand. We want to make it right. You can't make it right, I said. Not with flowers, not with dinners, not even with words. What you took from her that day can't be returned. But you can choose who you'll be from now on. He nodded, eyes wet. Emily looked like she might cry. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, but also clear. I've already changed my will, I said calmly. Everything I've built, everything I've saved will go to her, not out of spite, but because she's never once made me feel invisible. They were stunned. My son blinked, trying to find words. Emily opened her mouth, closed it again. I'm not punishing you, I added. I'm honoring what matters, and she matters. The check came. I paid it, not as a gesture of peace, but as punctuation. They hugged me again, this time tighter, more real. I held them both, but felt no pull to soften. I had said what needed saying, and that was enough. When I got home that night, my granddaughter was waiting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. She looked at me and said, You okay? I am now, I told her, because they had tried to apologize, and I had listened. But more importantly, I had chosen peace on my own terms. I hadn't planned to gather them all again. Not after the wedding, not after the silence that followed my decision. But something inside me felt unfinished, not bitter, just unresolved. And perhaps that's what aging does to you. It softens the sharp edges of anger into the slow ache of understanding. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted a reckoning, quiet, respectful, undeniable. So I planned one final dinner. Not a holiday, not a celebration. Just a meal, a gathering of what once was. I sent handwritten invitations, not texts. I wrote each one with a pen that used to belong to my husband, black ink, smooth strokes, the kind of pen you only use when something matters. I invited my son, of course, his wife, a few cousins, and I invited my granddaughter not as a silent companion this time, but as a co-host. She helped me design the menu, picked out the linen napkins, even arranged the small wildflower bouquets for the table. It felt like we were building something real, not just a dinner, but a statement. I cooked all day, roast chicken with rosemary, garlic potatoes, a warm apple tart. The smell of it all filled the house and wrapped around me like memory. I set the table with the good china, the one we used to only take out for special occasions. Birthdays, Christmas homecomings. This time I took it out for myself, for her, for the truth that needed to sit among us at that table without being dressed in apology. They arrived on time, all smiles, and cautious steps, unsure of what they were walking into. My son brought wine. His wife brought a bouquet that still had a florist's tag on it. I thanked them both kindly. We sat. We poured drinks. We passed bread. We laughed even. It was almost easy to pretend. Almost. But then, after the main course, I rose to speak. No clinking of glasses, no dramatic clearing of the throat. Just the weight of the moment, and the way every chair shifted when I stood. I wanted to thank you for coming, I began, voice-steady hands folded in front of me. I wasn't sure we'd share another meal like this, but I'm glad we did. My son looked at me wary but silent. His wife sipped her wine, eyes lowered. I also wanted to tell you I continued why I've made the decisions I have, about the house, the savings, the future. There was a rustle, the sound of forks paused mid-air. I've raised one child, I said, turning gently toward my granddaughter. I did it without a plan, without support, without rest sometimes, but I did it with love, with consistency, and with a promise that she would never feel like an afterthought. I let that hang for a moment. The silence grew thicker. I know some of you feel hurt, confused, maybe even angry, and that's all right. But I won't apologize for honoring what has been real in my life, for choosing to leave my name and my home with the one person who never made me question my place. My son opened his mouth, but I raised a hand not harshly, just with finality. Let me finish. He leaned back. You all had a chance to know her, to love her, to see her. And you didn't. You looked away. And whether it was out of discomfort or distraction or plain indifference, I saw it. And so did she. I looked at my granddaughter, who hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. She was watching me with such stillness, such belief, that I felt stronger in her gaze than I had felt in years. I'm not angry, I said softly. I'm not seeking revenge. But I am done explaining myself. I am done asking to be seen. The room was still. Even the ticking clock on the mantel seemed to hold its breath. I gathered you here not to shame you, I added, but to give you a gift. My son frowned. What gift? I looked at each of them one by one, the truth, spoken plainly, while I'm still here to speak it. No one responded. What could they say? There was no accusation they could hurl, no excuse strong enough to rewrite what had already been lived. We ate dessert in near silence, not cold, just quiet, like the final pages of a book that no longer needs to be explained. When it was time to leave, my son lingered. He hugged me tighter than he had in years. I get it, he whispered, even if I wish it were different. I nodded, kissed his cheek. Wishing doesn't make a family, I said. Showing up does. After they left, my granddaughter and I stood side by side at the sink washing dishes in a gentle rhythm. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her presence said everything. I had gathered them all not to plead, not to persuade, but to hold up a mirror, to say, this is who we became. This is what we chose. And in doing so, I had freed myself from the last remnants of hoping they'd change. Some families are built by blood, others by choice. And sometimes the most honest thing we can do is choose. After that night, the air in my home felt different, cleaner somehow. Not lighter exactly, but clearer, like a window that had finally been opened after too many seasons of stale breath and swallowed words. I had said what needed saying. I had faced them with steady hands and soft truths, and now there was only the echo left behind, not the echo of guilt or shame, just the sound of everything that no longer needed to be spoken. My son didn't call the next day, nor the day after, and I didn't expect him to. The kind of silence that followed our dinner wasn't born from confusion. It was born from knowing. He knew now. He had seen the line and the space on either side of it, and like most men raised on unquestioned authority, he didn't know how to step back into a world where love had requirements, where grace had boundaries, where a mother could say enough without raising her voice. But I wasn't angry, not anymore. Something happens when you stop chasing people who've stopped seeing you. You begin to return home not to your house, but to yourself. You stop performing. You stop dressing your worth in softness, hoping it will be easier to swallow. You let the silence sit at your table like an honored guest and ask it, "What now?" In the weeks that followed, I kept living, not dramatically, not loudly, just steadily. I woke early. I tended the garden. I wrote letters to old friends and finished mending the quilt that had sat half done for 3 winters. My granddaughter and I began to read together again each night. She would rest her head on my shoulder and ask me what the words meant, and I would answer not just with definitions, but with stories. Stories her mother once told stories. I had forgotten stories that had waited patiently for a quiet place to bloom. And all the while I waited for the guilt, for the regret, for the pang of having said too much or taken too much away, but it never came. Because what I had taken away was never theirs to keep. It was mine, my will, my home, my story. And for the first time it was being written without apology. There was a Sunday when I sat alone on the porch, listening to wind move through the wind chimes. The light filtered through the trees in soft streaks, and the birds fluttered from branch to branch like punctuation marks in the stillness. I thought about all the years I had spent giving my time, my patience, my voice, and how I had always hoped that someone would look up one day and say, "Thank you. We see what you've done." But that thank you never came, and now I knew it didn't have to. Because silence there's mine had become a sentence, a full one, complete, not a pause, not a breath held in, but a declaration finally finished. I didn't need more words. I didn't need a revision of the past. I didn't need a confession from anyone but myself. And I had already spoken that truth with action, with stillness, with unwavering care. One afternoon, my son dropped off a package. He didn't knock, just left it on the porch. A box of chocolates, a card, no envelope, just the words for everything. "We're trying." I left it on the kitchen counter for a day, then 2. On the 3rd day, I opened the box and shared the chocolates with my granddaughter while we watched the rain. I didn't reply to the card, not because I was cruel, but because the space between us needed to be quiet for a while. Not filled, just honored. Sometimes silence is not absence. Sometimes it is presence sharpened, a choice not to continue the noise, a way of saying I have nothing more to prove. I know who I am now. I taught my granddaughter that without teaching. I showed her with my posture, with my eyes, with the way I folded linen napkins, even when it was just the 2 of us. That love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers, "I'm still here, and I'm still choosing you." And so I gave them silence. I gave them the distance they had once given me. I gave them the dignity of their own choices left unchallenged, and in return I took back my own. Not in rage, not in judgment, but with the soft, slow, holy power of knowing when to stop asking for what someone will never give. I always thought legacy was something material, a house, a necklace, a name etched in neat cursive on brittle paper, but now I see it differently. Legacy isn't what we leave behind when we die. It's what we choose to pass on while we're still here. quietly, deliberately in moments that don't always look like lessons. It's in what we forgive and what we don't, in what we hold and what we let go. And more than anything, it's in who we choose to love without conditions. So I gave it to her everything. Not because she asked, not because she earned it like a prize, but because she carried the weight of our family with grace. Because when others stepped back, she stepped forward. She never complained. She never fought to be seen. But I saw her every day in the way she waited for me to sit before serving herself dinner, in the way she remembered her mother's lullabies better than I ever could, in the way she didn't let the world make her bitter even when it offered her every reason to be. When the final paperwork was done, I brought her into the living room and handed her the envelope. She looked at it like it might burn. "What is it?" she asked, her voice hushed, as if the walls might overhear. "My trust," I said. "Not the money, not the house. You already had those. This is my trust, written down." She opened it slowly, eyes scanning the lines, lips parted in disbelief. I could see the moment it registered that everything I had would become hers one day. Not just the objects, but the weight, the responsibility, the story. "But why me?" she whispered, barely breathing. I took her hands, now nearly as big as mine, and pressed them between my palms. Because when I needed to be reminded of what love looks like, you didn't look away. Her chin quivered. She looked at me the way her mother once did, eyes wide, unsure how to hold something so heavy without dropping it. "I'm scared," she said. "I was too," I replied. "But I had you, and now you have me." She didn't cry. Not then. She just leaned into me, tucked herself into my arms like she used to when she was small. We sat there like that until the sun dipped behind the trees, until the house dimmed into a soft blue hush. That night I lit a candle in my daughter's memory and placed it by the window. I told her everything. How her daughter had grown into something luminous. How she still wore her mother's stubborn kindness. How through her I had found a reason to become whole again. I didn't tell my son about the final update. I didn't need to. The absence of his name said everything. The space where he might have been was now a mirror, and he would have to sit with what it reflected. But I didn't do it for him. I did it for her. I did it because legacy should not be a reward for proximity or a transaction for politeness. It should be an offering of soul handed down to the ones who tended it, who cherished it, who never turned away when it wept. I don't know how many years I have left, but I know that when I go, she won't wonder if she was loved. She won't look around this house and feel like a guest. She will know this was built for her, not the bricks, not the furniture, the memory, the lineage, the quiet roaring truth that someone once saw her, all of her, and said, "Yes, you." And that to me is peace. That is justice without noise. That is revenge without cruelty. That is the sound a door makes when it closes gently behind you and the air on the other side smells like freedom. I didn't need to raise my voice. I just needed to remember my worth and give it to the only person who never asked for it but always treated it like gold. Slower pacing. Soft, emotional release. Sometimes I sit in the garden with a cup of tea watching the wind rustle through the leaves. Everything speaks more slowly now, the light, the birds, even my own breath. There's a kind of grace in having nothing left to prove, in knowing that silence is not emptiness but space, that walking away doesn't always mean defeat. Sometimes it means healing. I've spent much of my life giving, quietly, consistently, pouring myself into people and places hoping someone would see the shape of my sacrifice. But in the end, I realized the ones worth giving to are the ones who notice before they're told. Some endings don't explode. They dissolve. They shift. They breathe you into a new chapter without fanfare. And when that happens, you learn to listen to the softness, to the peace that comes when you no longer chase what was never meant to be yours. I gave them silence, and in it I found peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from knowing. I chose love, not theirs, but mine, hers, ours. And that's enough.